Good afternoon, everyone. It's 12 noon, and welcome to the SRPAA Web Series. So this is the SRPAA, the Schulich Real Property Alumni Association's web series called Reimagining the Why of Real Estate and Infrastructure, Building with Humanity. This is our episode 4 of the series called Building for Everyone, Why Affordable Housing is Good for All of Us. To give you a little bit of context, this series came about essentially when COVID hit, and we were thinking, how can we connect with alumni? How can we connect with our community and our industry friends and partners as a whole? And we want to do something a little bit different. So we're following a bit of a story arc in the sense that we're talking about the why we do what we do. And we will get into the how, and you'll hear that today as well. But we wanted to examine some of the opportunities and challenges for positive social change through a purposeful approach to business and why we should care about that. And the goal is to shine a light on the human element of the built environment of which we all live and work and play in. And it's our belief that when people are able to align their professional goals with their personal values, that we can have true positive transformation. So we're looking to engage alumni and connect with the community. And actually this episode 4, focusing on affordable housing, was originally contemplated to take place as an in-person event in partnership with our labs back in April. And with everything that happened, that was delayed and put off. So now we are here on Zoom. So this has been led by 2 of our alumni, Nader Kawazmi and Kyle Pinto, with co-lead of James Innes at our labs, who's also our moderator today. This episode is generously sponsored by Create2O and Podium Developments, with funds supporting PWA Toronto, People with AIDS Foundation of Toronto. Our next episode will be towards the end of July. Stay tuned. We're still in early stage planning for that. If you want to remain connected with what we're up to and the Schulich Real Property Alumni Association, you can follow us on LinkedIn. And these episodes are being recorded and will be made available online. We're just going through a bit of an editing and cleaning up process. So with that, I will hand it over to James and kick things off.
Great. Thanks very much, Christian, and welcome everyone to our discussion today. Very excited for the topic and particularly the panelists and their thoughts that we're going to be hearing shortly. A couple of notes for everyone who's been joining in. Anna Balau, the deputy mayor, unfortunately was unable to join for health reasons, but fortunately, Nancy Singer, the director of strategic initiatives from Kihila, has filled in, and we wish the deputy mayor a speedy recovery. So there will be a Q&A for the webinar. You'll see the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So if you can direct questions through the Q&A, we'll pull those out and direct them to the panelists during the last 15 or 20 minutes of the discussion. Thank you as well to everyone who submitted questions in advance. We pulled out a couple of those already. So on to the panel discussion specifically around affordable housing and the why, not just the how, but the why of affordable housing. So we've structured the talk into those 2 sections today, and we've used Andrei Kuzmicki, who's a pioneer in the space and a real thought leader, for some inspiration for these 2 sections, to use a couple of quotes from him as well to frame the section. So the first section around the why, you cannot be an island of prosperity in a sea of destitution, to talk about the why of affordable housing. And then the second section, where we're going to go into the how, is you're not just in business to make a profit, but you need a profit to be in business. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and the how of affordable housing in the last section. So to go into the panelists, which we're very fortunate to have some real thought leaders in the space with tremendous experience across the board, kind of going from my left to right. Stephen Jones is the Vice President of Innovation at the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, over 22 years experience across the organization, now leading the innovation group, tasked with some fairly audacious and big goals, which we love to see. And and bringing a new way of thinking to tackling some major challenges. There we've got Leith Moore, the co-founder of Our House. Leith has spent as well over 30 years in the development industry, spanning Sobara, Fieldgate Homes, is also an adjunct professor at Waterloo, past chair of Builds, past president of the Ontario Home Builders Association, and the past chair of Evergreen. Brian Johnston is currently the CEO of Create TO, the City of Toronto's real estate arm, with more than 30 years of management experience, and former COO of Mattamy Homes. And then again, very fortunate to have Nancy Singer joining us as well from Kihilla, over 40 years of experience in planning and housing, and is currently the director of strategic initiatives. So a fantastic panel, and thanks everyone, for joining. Okay, so into the first section around the why of affordable housing. So I'm gonna open it up with a question to the group, and we'll go in alphabetical order, and I'll kind of call people out as we're going. So affordable housing is a multifaceted issue and can be approached in multiple ways, whether it's financing, policy, or development. So what role do you play in the pursuit of affordable housing? So Brian, we'll start with you.
Okay, well, thanks, James. I think that's one of the easier questions to answer is why affordable housing? Why do we feel that's so important? I mean, it's really hard to argue the point. I mean, two of our basic human needs are food and shelter, and so shelter is housing. And so, you know, and particularly this issue has become more and more important over the last, I'd say, 30 years in the GTA. I mean, it's something that's omnipresent. It's you know, obviously we see it in other cities around the world, you know, most notably places like New York City or London. But I would suggest to you that Toronto is becoming a victim of its own success. I mean, the city has been growing so much over the last 30 years. You know, it draws in so many people. It's just a magnet for immigrants, and why not? It's got almost every ethnic group that populates the planet, and you know, besides that, Toronto's a great place to live in. And you see that in other cities, certainly across Canada, places like Vancouver, and you're starting to see it in places like Montreal, Ottawa, Calgary, kind of these cities that are large, and they've got a sort of a center of gravity that draws people in. And so when you start to think about large cities and their attractiveness, you think about housing supply and the need for housing. In my past lives, I used to go to London, England a lot, and I used to hear about how your average accountant or whatever would take 90 minutes each way to commute. And I thought, that's not a way to live, because that was what people were trying to do in order to achieve affordable housing. And so London is a place that has been wrestling with this issue probably for 100 years. And so now it's suddenly on the forefront for us as a city of Toronto, that it's now becoming the thought du jour. Places like San Francisco as well and New York City. These large cities in the world are all wrestling with this issue. And so for us as a society, it's, again, I'll just come back to my original point. It is a basic human right. And so it's not, why is it important? The question really is, how are we going to address it properly and effectively?
Thanks, Brian. Lee, your initial thoughts.
Unmute.
You caught me by surprise. I was looking at last names. So I agree with Brian, and I think I'll just skip to role. You know, I think of myself as a reformed builder and developer. So after 35 years of you know, madly battling upstream and, you know, approvals, 10 years per project, I realized that really we're not really good at creating affordable housing through the typical processes. And so I started thinking about how do we really do that? And came to the conclusion that we needed to kind of look at planning policy for, primarily in my case, middle density. And what's good about it? I found a lot good in it. Why aren't we building it? Why don't we build it? Well, because our processes are not particularly well adapted to that scale of development. And I really don't think that the development community as such is is going to be the best solution going forward for affordable. I think we need a new approach. And I started playing with the idea of pattern approvals, repeat buildings that can be not one-offs, and applying, new technologies, off-site fabrication, on-site tilting, to design a faster, healthier, cheaper form of housing. It's not for everywhere. I think the development community is good at what they do and should continue to do that, particularly one-offs and higher density. But I think that at a certain scale, we need a new approach, and really our house has been set up to bring products that are, directly to housing providers, not to be beat around the bush too much, take the profit and the developer out of it, and bring it straight to the owner.
Great. Nancy? Nope, you went the other way.
Was on. Oop.
Now you're back on mute. Nancy?
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, just took 3 buttons to do that. Anyway, I'm really pleased to be here today and participate in this panel discussion. This is an incredibly, it's been my life's work, essentially. I'm going to take the perspective from the nonprofit sector because that's where I'm coming from, though I was a city planner many years ago. But I want to talk, I like what Lee said about innovation, because I really think that's the only way we're going to change, the built form. And it took a pandemic to bring us to that conclusion that, housing and health and mental well-being are all intertwined. And it's really the top of everyone's political agenda right now. That's a good outcome of COVID. I can't say anything else positive about COVID, but I will attribute that to it. So Kahila, we're a small nonprofit, because I'm sure many of you aren't familiar with us. A number of developers know who we are, and the city knows who we are. We try to be cutting edge in that we do things before they're allowed to be done. And for example, acquiring units before it was permitted through Section 37. We've always partnered with other nonprofits and developers, and we've tried to raise awareness through very, stimulating debates with very high-profile panelists. We've highlighted new building techniques, timber, and modular. We did a competition on modular housing over a year ago. And we also created our own private rent assistance program, which is supported by the private development community. So we've had, and we've been, we've done a lot of deputations at the city. We're always trying to think of a different way of doing things. And so we've been a bit of a thorn in the bureaucracy, but it's, we'd like to get heard, and we'd like to do things in a different way in terms of partnering and nonprofits working together, and everyone being able to participate in different developments and not competing against each other.
Excellent. Thank you, Nancy. Stefan.
Thanks, James. A pleasure to be here, and I will echo much of what my colleagues have said. We at CMHC, as a Crown corporation, we're uniquely positioned between the private and public markets, and I think that gives us a unique perspective on the housing ecosystem in Canada. And of course, in 2018, we set ourselves a pretty ambitious goal as a company that by 2030, everyone in Canada has a home that they can afford and that meets their needs. That's rallied, so my 22 years at CMHC, that's rallied our company like I have never seen before. I would say all resources are mobilized towards that goal: research, our policy advice to government, our mortgage loan insurance products and services, our affordable housing programs. And in fact has then led us to say, okay, that's not enough. We've created this innovation function that I'm leading. We're investing in partnerships. We really are taking an outward approach. If we're going to achieve this goal that we've set for ourselves, we most definitely are not going to do it alone. And it's going to require us to sort of leverage, partner, work with all sorts of stakeholders from across the housing system in Canada. Of course, all underpinned by this national housing strategy. So we deliver the Canada's first national housing strategy on behalf of the government. 10-year program, $55 billion to help provide affordable housing for Canadians. But we know that that is simply not enough, and we're going to have to do much more in many different ways in order to achieve the goal. So pleasure to be here and have this important conversation.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's dive right into it. So first question to you, Nancy. Let's talk about the why. So why is the creation of affordable housing an important priority for cities and for society?
Wow. Okay. All right.
Nope. You went. You're.
I'm a two button unmute here for some reason. So I guess I want to rephrase that question, and I'd say it's not an objective like to pursue affordable housing, but it's actually a pivotal priority. I don't think cities are going to survive if we don't change the way we do things, and I know it's a pretty draconian statement, but I think we have an ability now to thrive better as cities and reduce the class divide, which is very apparent in Toronto. We know which areas have been hardest hit by COVID, and we know that they're the low-income areas. I think that affordable housing actually gives us a way to repair our cities and build those inclusive, diverse communities that we always talk about. It's a tool, and I think it's time to start using it effectively and break down the barriers. But there are a lot of changes that have to happen before that it can even begin to take place.
Excellent. Thank you, Nancy. So over to you, Brian. In terms of maybe taking the framing from Nancy there in terms of having affordable housing be a priority for cities and why that's important.
Yeah, I mean, affordable housing is not necessarily a construct of cities per se. I mean, you can go to places in the United States and you won't have these conversations because it's just not an issue. And I used to joke that I certainly would prefer the problems that Toronto has to the problems that Detroit used to have, where they were knocking down 1,000 houses a year because they had so much excess supply. And you could buy a house for less than $20,000. But there was some more fundamental problems in that city that kind of led to that type of situation. So we're kind of struggling with an issue that is unique to certain parts of the world, and certainly we're seeing that in Toronto, and again I will come back to what I originally said, which is I think it's a good news scenario. We're fortunate that we have to deal with it. I think we're not perhaps dealing with it in the right way, or we're not. I think maybe a better way to put it is we're not dealing with it effectively. And as I used to be in the private sector, and the demand side of the equation was never a problem. Just don't worry about that. It's the supply problem, which was a never-ending source of headache, concern, and sort of exasperation, quite frankly. And that's the part we need to address. You wouldn't have an affordable housing problem if you didn't have everybody wanting to buy a house or a condo or rent an apartment. And by the way, when you talk about affordable housing, I think we just need to frame that properly. Affordable housing is not necessarily subsidized housing or government aided or assisted housing. It's just housing that's available to the public, and you can define the public as you wish. And so, where I'm coming from these days, which is at the city, we're sort of we're into the quote unquote subsidized part of the market, but there's a huge spectrum of housing types and product. And so when we talk about affordable housing, we need to talk about all types of housing, and depending on what your needs are, you might just need a 1-bedroom condo, or if you got 3 kids, that's just not going to cut it. And so you see government trying to address those issues. I would argue not as well as it could, but that's another issue. So it's definitely a wide spectrum to be discussed.
James, just to pick up on something Brian said there around affordable housing. I agree that it's important to distinguish between affordable housing and housing affordability. And housing affordability is this thing at kind of the market level. How do we just make generally housing more affordable to Canadians? And what I find a real shame these days is that this sort of idea of workforce housing, that you've got nurses and teachers, firemen who cannot live in the communities within which they work because they just cannot afford a place to live. And so I think it's important to think about the broad spectrum of housing in this country, and as Brian said, access and meeting the needs of everybody across that spectrum.
I wanted to agree with what Brian said about affordability, defining it. You know, when I was a developer and builder all those years, you know, we defined affordable by, did it sell? It was affordable. Did it rent? It was affordable. So, you know, as long as somebody took it up, and we never had leftovers, so everything was affordable. So that definition by itself doesn't work. And Stefan's right. I mean, effective rental for a wide range of people in a city is really key. I live in a neighborhood called the Beaches. And for a decade, Toronto Life used to downgrade our neighborhood. You know, when they used to rate each neighborhood in Toronto in the top 20, whatever, Beaches never made the top 10 because, you know why? We had too much damn rental and too great a diversity of housing. And today, I would argue that's probably the strength of this community and not a weakness. But I think our attitudes need to change. Perhaps they are changing. And Toronto did a great thing by allowing secondary suites and lanes. And I know they're going to move forward with coach housing. There's no better way for a family to deal with problems we have today and then to build on their own already owned asset. And that's the cheapest housing they're going to get. And that's where people can take care of their kids and their parents. And it's a whole other approach to housing that we haven't had. And in terms of effective rental, effective affordable, I think Toronto deserves a lot of credit. And there's only Waterloo, Hamilton, Toronto, and Ottawa in Ontario that have it. And frankly, everybody should.
Excellent. Thanks, Philippe. So I'm gonna kind of take that theme as well and follow it through around some of the societal and perception hurdles. We were talking, and there was a great discussion there around actually defining what affordable housing is. So maybe to you, Stefan, around some of those perception hurdles that exist in society today around affordable housing.
Yeah, they're pretty significant. This concept of, you know, NIMBYism, not in my backyard. I think we really need to start thinking about how do we shift Canadian mindsets over time. You know, we're experimenting with things like behavioral economics and behavioral science to understand, you know, the motivations and behaviors behind Canadians and why they think the way they do and how we might shift that. How do we turn that into yes in my backyard? I think is a critical aspect of success. And you know, while densification, you know, whether that be gentle or extreme, depending on where you're talking about, I also think proximity is an important concept that we can't lose sight of. This idea of, you know, the 15, I've heard Jennifer Keesmaat talking about the 15-minute, you know, neighborhoods and cities where everything you need is within close proximity. I think that's something else we need to think about. And you know, if densification is going to push on NIMBYism, and I think we need to, then maybe proximity or thinking around proximity might be something that kind of addresses that in a, or gets around that in a softer kind of way.
Nancy, anything to add there?
Yeah, I do. Thanks. Sorry, I just wanted to jump in on both, and probably back to the definition of affordable housing too, as someone who's very sensitized to that. I always call it unaffordable housing, actually. And there is as Brian you know, pointed out, there is a distinction. We call it social housing, not subsidized housing. It's just you know, it's a more polite term. You know, there is confusion, and the city's definition of affordable housing is not affordable housing, and that's why we're bridging subsidies to make it work for much lower incomes. And I think that in terms of perception, you know, NIMBYism, I'd say yes, housing in my backyard, not no housing, build housing in your backyard. And there's great concepts of that from Tiny Toronto, for example, you know, where, you know, you can, you know, insert a house in your backyard, and many of the lot sizes in the yellow belt can accommodate that, besides the, you know, garages, coach houses, and laneway housing. And also conversions. One UT student did a study on Rosedale and the mansions, which probably are not going to be an easy sell, as you know, we're facing an aging population. Boomers are, you know, selling their properties, downsizing, and who can afford to move into the, you know, these very, very expensive homes. They could be converted into multi-generational housing, which serves a totally different purpose, work housing. So there really are creative solutions with existing stock. And I liked what Lee said earlier too about, you know, inserting having a prototype, and I think of almost like a Lego insert for modular housing, that if you looked at every main street in the city, especially now we have an incredible opportunity with storefronts that are going to be boarded up, restaurants that are not going to be coming back, that you can take, that frontage and you can just put in, 5, 6 story, housing development. And it could be great, a great addition to any main street. And those prototypes are being developed. I know Ellis John is looking at a catalog of off the shelf, pick the type of modular housing you want to build. So I think we could head in that direction, but we're not going to get there unless we do some really serious legislative changes. And it's not enough just to say that, we have a, laneway housing now, and we tried it, and now, we have as of right second suite conversions. But unless there are incentive programs that go with that, people are not going to do that. I think those are really hard to, people will still always look at their homes as resale value, and how is it worth more? And we're kind of going back in time, because a lot of people bought rooming houses and converted them to single family homes. I know in the neighborhood that I just sold my house, and that was very true. So housing is very cyclable, and it's just going through it can go through a different cycle and be used in a different way again.
Brian.
Yeah, so I guess, through my career, the resistance to housing, it's not exclusive to affordable housing or anything, any way you define it. I've just basically concluded that people hate change. And when you're in a city, intensification represents change that you can see, and people have the fear of the unknown. They'd rather you just build houses up Highway 400 and keep going north, just get out of my way, I don't want to see it. And as we've been doing some of this affordable housing stuff at the city, the Housing Now program, we've had these community meetings. Before we did them, we actually had people there. Now we're doing them remotely, which is kind of interesting. And we could talk about that, but I won't. But people would just show up and simply say, "I'm opposed to what you were doing," but let us explain to you what we're doing. And we had one of our counselors, I'll name him Counselor Crawford. He did a great job. He basically said, "You are trying to stop housing for people such as my daughter, who cannot afford the regular type of housing in this city. And so you have to stop trying to predefine who the people are that are living in this type of housing. It's young people, and it's it's like your police, your fire, your nurses. These are people that don't want to live in Barrie. They don't want to live out in Port Hope. They don't want to take a GO train from Peterborough, wherever the hell they're coming from. They'd actually like to live close to where they work." And so there's a psychology here, a mindset that needs to be overcome and properly understood in order to move people along the spectrum of acceptance.
People are used to infill or redevelopment, and you're right, they hate change, and they're really used to it taking a very long time and being very nasty to be around. And so, shameless plug, www.ourhouse.ca, 6-story all wood infill pilot project underway. And the thing to design is it's 6 months to build, not 2 years. We don't dig a big garage. And we have to stop creating parking requirements and digging big holes and pouring concrete everywhere. And there are ways to make, infill and redevelopment cheaper and faster and easier to slip into a neighborhood. More importantly, the design needs to become, start adapting, passive house and active house principles, and, build something that has a front window and a back window and feels like a house as a rental unit, and isn't just, another big corridor building. There's all, and let the whether it's a laneway house or a 6-story, let it cycle as your life cycles rather than you moving as your life cycle goes. That's a key thing for our building programs, is build it right in the beginning, and people can use it in different ways over time.
Thanks, Lee. So Nancy, last question on this section to you, and then of course to panelists who want to jump in around the changing nature of the conversation of affordable housing. And 2020 has been a year of change, despite people not liking change. From the COVID crisis in particular. So how have you seen the the conversation evolve on affordable housing and specifically relating to the COVID-19 crisis.
Yeah, I mentioned that a bit earlier, but before I delve into the question that's asked, I just wanted to comment on what was just said before. And I think we as boomers have a lot to be blamed for. My son certainly blames us for not being able to afford a house in Vancouver, for example, as a young professional. Because we're sitting on very expensive real estate. And we're not ready to say that it's worth less, and we paid very little for it getting into the market. And housing has become a commodity. It's not just a place to live. And that's been a driving problem now to whether it's, rental buildings that have been bought up by equity firms. And so we may say that we voice the words housing is a basic human right, but it's not in the marketplace. And I think we have to face that there's some real economics at work here, that there have to be changes made on that level, or it's going to be very difficult to implement the things that we want to. So over the last 10 years, I'd say that, some things have changed and a lot hasn't changed. It's been a very slow process. The city sets goals and targets each year for what it wants to achieve, and it's rarely met them. It's been a struggle to build anything. We moved off the building model. We were a nonprofit. We have 3 buildings in our portfolio, and of course they were built when there was a social housing program, and it's very different. We realized quite a number of years ago that it was uneconomical for us to continue to build nonprofit housing, and that's when we began our partnerships with developers. So, for example, Brian, under your Create TO program and Housing Now, we partner with developers and we try to access as many units as we can in their developments. And we have to usually bring in our private rent assistance program to make those units, affordable to the target groups that we're housing. So I'd say that and now, because of the pressure, we finally have, clued in that shelters are inhumane and we're housing people. And we've known for many years that it's far less costly to build permanent housing than to continue to build shelters. And we're going to have to think of new solutions now for long-term care that, with our aging population, that it can't be the way it is. And, and that's a total rethink. And I think that, so I think we've hopefully learned something. But I think we're slow learners, and it's hard to implement change. Bureaucracies still work in silos. We have more cooperation now than we ever have before, but you still have city departments that don't talk to each other. You can fast track something, but someone, in buildings is going to slow it down. So I think it's really a challenge to make these changes. And unless we can, I don't know that, I'd like to be optimistic because I have an optimistic personality, or I could have been doing affordable housing for the last 40 years and still be here and laugh about it. You hear everything, from, I've been in many public meetings and heard everything possible that anyone could say to criticize why they don't want, a new development or a different kind of development in their neighborhood. So again, I think the onus is on all of us as a community to change our attitudes and, and accept everyone and realize that, cities can grow and thrive. And this is a great opportunity. And I hope we seize the moment.
Thanks, Nancy. So we'll use that to kind of segue into the second half of the conversation, where we are going to get into some of the why of it, or rather the why, the how. And you referenced Brian and the Housing Now. So I'll turn it over to Brian to talk a little bit about what they're doing at Create TO, specifically the Housing Now program. They've got 3 sites that have gone to market at 777 Victoria Park, 705 Warden, Wilson Heights, 14 sites in the pipeline. So, maybe if you can talk a little bit about what you've learned, Brian, putting these projects into the live state, and then specifically the role of the private sector and the not-for-profit.
Yeah, there's a lot of ground to cover with that question, James. But what I will say is that we've got 17 sites in various stages of planning, and Well, that's a lot of sites. I'm going to tell you, just coming from my old world as a developer, to have 17 high density sites in one city, that's a lot. That probably makes us one of the largest developers in the city of Toronto itself. So let me just start out by nothing has changed from my perspective. It always takes time. It always takes more time than you expected. That's probably good news for all the developers that might be listening, thinking, "Hey, is it just me?" No, it's not just you. It's us collectively. It takes a long time to get stuff through the system. Some of the things we learned, some of the things we knew about, like we've got some great sites. They're on subways or LRT. There's so much so on the subways and LRTs that they're actually occupying sites where there might be a subway station, and so that somehow has caused problems for us in the sense that, for example, the Ontario line, the subway line that's going to go from Ontario Place up to just north of the Science Centre, that's created some uncertainty on a number of our sites, and so therefore that's slowing us down. Did not see that when those sites were announced, and so these are the type of thing that impact every developer, unbeknownst to them, particularly when you have a lot of sites. The pandemics obviously had a negative impact, and I think I saw something that the Toronto Home Builders put out that said 500 projects are delayed, and so we're no different because that's impacted us in both physically and administratively, and in terms of how we actually move things through the system. And probably the one thing that's probably surprised me the most is that we now have competing forces. Like 50 years ago, development, particularly in the GTA, in the suburban areas, was welcomed, and with a few exceptions, most municipalities were very positive about it. And then suddenly evolved to the point where no, very resistant, don't like it, don't bring it, take it somewhere else. Like a place like Oakville was famous for it. Something very negative about development. Burlington is kind of blown hot and cold on development. But Toronto was always sort of viewed as a positive place when you're doing high-rise condominium because it was kind of the only place. And now we're into an era where we actually have two groups of people showing up to our meetings. We have the don't bring that here ever, and what are you even making that proposal for? And I sort of referenced that. And then we now actually have a countervailing group that's sort of saying, well, you guys aren't putting enough density on these sites. What's going on? And that kind of makes me smile. It's like, geez, I've never had that. I mean, if I were a private developer, I'd be doing cartwheels with those people. I'd say, I just keep inviting them. Like, come to our public meetings, help me, help me, help me. But as a city, we're not in this business to make money. We're in business to get housing done. And so ironically, that's created some indecision and sort of hesitation and a pause. And in fact, it actually happened on one of our sites at Warden St. Clair. We brought it out, we had this density agreed upon, and then there was this sort of undercurrent of, well, maybe there's not enough density here. And I kind of go, well, yeah, I'd love to take the city to the OMB here, but I don't think that's going to help us very much. That would really upset a lot of people. And I'm being somewhat facetious when I say that. But we did bring it back to the drawing board because there was a view that, well, maybe we could get more density, and the planning department was somewhat responsive to it, as were others. And so, but that itself caused a delay. And so delay is just the enemy of progress. It really is. And in our business, if we could just speed everything up by 6 months, man, we could get so much more housing done. And everybody will be shaking their head saying, yeah, that guy's right. And the city does recognize this. They've got a thing called Concept Keys, which is its intentions are noble, which is to try to expedite development, to try and speed it through the system. But as we all know, that's not just one department or division that deals with development. And it's not just at the city. Sometimes you're involved with the province, conservation authorities, the federal government, the list goes on and on and on. And so all these players have an impact on development. And so it is sort of frustrating, and it's very hard to sort of corral everybody to take the same view that we should work collectively to move and expedite development, because we're actually hurting ourselves. And it's got to be viewed up and down the line. Everybody has to recognize that. And I will make one more comment. I was on the board of CMHC. You may not remember that, Stefan, but and I remember thinking, man, CMHC, you know, it's great they've got all this money, but our problem is not money. I mean, I know it is for some people, but the banks have lots of money, trust me. Our problem is getting it through the system. And if CMHC could do something and get to the province and say, guys, you need to help push the processes and procedures so that there's a level playing field, so that we can all push our product through the system faster. And it's very much a pipe dream. I'm going to acknowledge that. I live in sort of la-la land on some of this stuff, but it is a vision and a hope that someday we can all work collectively to push stuff through the system faster.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian. Well, that segues quite nicely into the question for Stefan around the role of financing in affordable housing. So kind of on a higher level from financing, and then specifically what you're doing on the innovation role at CMHC to take this forward.
Yeah, and so Brian mentioned La La Land. I'm there with you, Brian. I too have a dream. CMHC is, well, so financing is critical to housing and affordable housing. You know, housing isn't free. And of course, we offer a number of programs that create incentives and you know, reduce barriers to financing, whether that be the rental construction financing initiative or co-investment, or even our standard mortgage insurance. That's all about providing developers with low-cost financing, simple terms, with some, you know, hooks and you know, checks and balances to ensure that the right type of housing is being developed. But of course, that's all underpinned by federal funding. And you know, the recent crisis, of course, the government has written a pretty big check. And so, you know, what that funding is going to look like in the future is anybody's guess. And so we really do have to start looking to alternative mechanisms for financing. And so, you know, we worked with a company out of BC called Housing Investment Corporation, where we invested $20 million through a strong credit rating that they were able to leverage that and turn that into a $400 million fund for developing affordable housing. Those kinds of mechanisms are needed. And what I'm interested in, and to sort of circle back on Brian's comment around, you know, bringing supply to market quickly and some of those barriers. Later this year, we'll be launching something called the Housing Supply Challenge, which is a spin-off from the Smart Cities Challenge that infrastructure launched back in 2018, I believe. This is you know, we talk about policy innovation in government, this application of challenge methodology. So here we have $300 million over 5 years, where we're going to put a series of challenges to market to basically incent stakeholders to partner, to convene, to come together with ideas and solutions that remove barriers to housing supply. And I'm personally really optimistic around what this program can generate in terms of new ideas, and just experimenting with this new way of convening, bringing private market players to the table, focusing attention on, you know, affordable housing challenges in this country, I think is something important and that we're about to embark on. We're also, we have a pretty strong partnership with Accenture. They're our IT partners. And so we're also doing a lot of work around examining how we can use technology and digital and data to make what is a relatively inefficient housing ecosystem more efficient. How do you remove redundancies, inefficiencies in that system? What can technology do in that place? And we've got a couple interesting announcements coming in the next couple months that I think will demonstrate us trying to think about things differently, trying some stuff. These things may not all work, but I think it demonstrates that we're willing to step outside the sort of traditional way of doing things and work with various stakeholders across the system to see if we can't find solutions to this problem. Yeah.
Great.
And yeah.
Super. Thanks, Stefan. Good insights kind of on some of the specific programs, and someone who's probably quite interested on that side and might be participating as well as on the private sector developer side is Lee. So Lee, question over to you around what you're doing at our house, and then the use of prefabricated and modular housing as a tool for tackling affordable housing. And you're on mute.
At least I swore on mute. One of the reasons I sort of pivoted to this late in life epiphany was I realized that I only had enough life left in me to do one more project. And I thought, well, that sucks. I'd like to do more than one before I die. So I actually, maybe I am accused of living in La La Land, and I do see a way forward. I think that in a mid-density, in Toronto they're called mid-rise guidelines approach, there is almost as of right zoning. With the laneway coach house bylaws coming almost as of, well, it is as of right zoning. That really does allow things like modular and panelized solutions to look at those bylaws and design solutions. That's what I've done. Solutions that fit. So that I can sell direct to a property owner, something that does not need a variance in a laneway sense, or a rezoning in a mid-rise sense, and can be faster. And once it's repeatable, cities can adapt to approving them faster. You still have to get through the building department, but it can be faster, and repeats can be faster. So that's why I'm totally opposed to, in an affordability, effective rental context, one-offs. I think that is for the kind of sites Brian's talking about. They're larger, they're more complex. So while those are getting through the process, and that process is always, like you already said, longer than you would expect, there's an opportunity to bleed a lot of pressure out of the system with these, smaller modular and infill. Now modular, we have some modular bits in our panelized systems. I'm dealing with sites that have small lanes, main streets, lots of traffic. Panels are the way to go. When you have a site that's a little bigger and you get a big crane truck in and you can swing modules around, that's the way to go. So they're complementary approaches. But I think they offer opportunities for approaches to deliver direct to property owners, whether it's Create Toronto, an owner of a 20-foot Main Street lot on the Danforth. This is an opportunity for them, while bigger systems and perfecting approval systems, everything else starts to happen. There are building code challenges. They take years to resolve. I mean, people, as much as you worry about zoning, we need to fix our building code for smaller and mid-rise. It's a one-size-fit-all code. So there's a lot of work to do in there, but there is this little crack of an opportunity that we can drive, 100,000 units in Toronto through over the next 10 years, easily. And that's what modular and prefabrication gives us the opportunity to build into, in a way that it was never economic to do mid-rise. We've all tried it on a mid-rise building. It doesn't work. So slab on grade, infill, mid-rise can, and it can serve a very big relief rental solution.
Excellent. Thanks. Thank you, Leith. So I'm keen to get to the Q&A section from the audience that have been putting in a few and a few that we had come in prior to the session as well. So we've got about 10 minutes. We've got about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to move into the questions. So if there is anything you want to flag to the panelists, put it in the Q&A, and we'll try and get through as many of these as we can. And one of the first ones that came in advance from one of the participants ties into Leith's comments there around speed and permitting and zoning as a way to tackle the problem. So open question to any of the panelists around how can the City of Toronto and the Province of Ontario speed up zoning, permitting, and other approval processes around new affordable and accessible housing development to deliver on the city's target of new affordable housing units?
I'm going to jump in and probably say something, again, a little bit controversial, but the city actually does have a tool in its back pocket it could use, very unpopular, that if its housing is declared as an emergency and municipal interest, it could override zoning, and the same for the province. And there's some ministerial order. It's, a hammer way of doing things, but if there's no other way to get things through quickly, that will do it. So some of those remedies do exist. I know Frank Clayton, in one of our, debates on affordable housing, came out and very clearly said, get rid of zoning. You get a lot of housing really fast if we didn't have the zoning in place. And of course, now we have more as of right permissions than we have in the past, recently with laneway housing and second suite conversions. So we're making some limited progress. But we really need to put the accelerator on for real housing to get built. But I like the dual approach of doing things incrementally as we go, because we know the larger sites are going to be more problematic and take more time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that I'm a Waterloo trained planner, so I could never agree to no zoning. We have to have it. The city's done, like in Toronto's context, there's some great OP policies. There's some great design guideline policies. Just haven't finished the play. Like, finish the damn zoning bylaw. I mean, there's zoning bylaws, but they're different everywhere. And, you might have the density, but you can only have 4 stories, or, and then that parking thing is everywhere. So I think that it wouldn't be such a hard thing. It's a political discussion, everything. Mm. Remember my first lesson from Edward Sabera. What is planning? The answer is politics. So, but if we could just finish that play, that would solve so many problems for incremental opportunities. And then, as Brian got 17 great sites, they'll come along and that'll have a big impact.
Yeah, I guess what I was going to say is that I think that you got to stay away from the politics in terms of some of these initiatives, because that's where it starts to get sticky. Candidly, politicians worry about getting reelected, and if you expose them to a political situation, they will retreat. I think it comes down to more about the bureaucracy, the planning department, building department. I think, Nancy, you said something that was really interesting, and I thought, yeah, great. This whole idea about retail stores getting boarded up, why not turn them into residential units? I mean, do you want to board up a retail site for 10 years? I mean, and this is called responding to current events and the current economic environment. We have a need for housing, and we're losing the need for retail. We should be able to move fast, but I guarantee you, we won't move fast. I mean, it's something that it's such a simple, common sense response, and we shouldn't be dictating to people all the time. So I'm not about no zoning, but I'm saying more flexible response to this. And I remember when we were building out in, was it Oakville, they had this live work thing that they were dictating to us. I'm going, who the hell wants work live or live work? And this isn't a residential subdivision. It was the planners that thought this was a great idea. Oh, this is ridiculous. This is not what people want. But out in Oakville, people were buying it because, hey, this is residential real estate. We want it, we need it, and we'll take this ridiculous zoning. I don't know what they thought people were doing, cutting hair or something at the bottom of the townhouse. Anyway, my message is more flexibility and doing it quicker in terms of responding to the environment that we're in.
Didn't I just see an announcement the other day where the Premier weighed in on building affordable housing on 14 transit sites across Toronto and waiving the public consultation process, which saves 12 months or so in that process? I thought that was an interesting development, at least in the Toronto area.
Saw it.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, I'm going to take a question here from the live chat. Maybe this is geared at you, Lee. How hard is it to apply modular and panelized construction to mid and high-rise buildings?
Not
hard.
Well, everything's hard. I spent 2 years doing it, so put in the time and you can do it. It's what it is you need to do something called BIM design and Revit design. So you need to think through and have your designs done so you've got that 3D model. We actually use 5D, so it has timing and cost built into it. And that's what you send to the factory to have produced, and it comes back to you in bits and parts that you assemble on site. Now, you can't just snap your fingers and do that. You need a robust supply chain, and you need a good set of designers who understand how to work with Revit, and everybody starts at the beginning. So it's a longer upfront process. Having done it, you repeat, and gets cheaper every time. It's not a solution for one-offs. And so therefore, this repeat build into a set series of guidelines or zonings that you can be guaranteed a market. Now mid-rise works. So technically it's easy. It's just a process that takes some time and upfront investment, and not many people will do it because they don't have the land supply. So that's why we've thought of this as a supply to owner. Brian's been through this. Remember when you used to be just a developer and then you became a builder? He's like, which profit do I get? Like, you know, there used to be 2 profits, then it was 1. I just split it out. It's the same here. You know, you can only have so many profits. So my system is me to owner, and the developers go do their thing. And so we reduce the number of profit takings along the way and keep it as lean and fast and cheap as possible.
Nice. Thank you, Leif. So I think there's one more question here which will help us kind of summarize and hopefully wrap up the conversation from the audience here. So if you could kind of think about the question and then maybe just frame like a short kind of wrap up thought from each. What are some of the key drivers for helping make and justify the business case for affordable housing? So Leif, we'll start with you.
Oh, thanks. We can't not do it. I mean, our Canadian society, Ontario society, Toronto society, we can't not have complete communities with opportunities for everyone to live, you know, in the kind of neighborhoods we want. And so we need to have these solutions, period.
Great. Brian?
Well, you know, again, that's a big question. I mean, I think it's the best place to go with this is for everybody, all players, governments and otherwise, citizens, observers, media, anybody's got a part to play in this, recognize that this is an issue. It's a collective response that is required. It's not somebody else's problem. Don't rely on government, the answer to all your questions. And in fact, the private sector is critical to all this because it's got the horses, it's got the expertise. They can do a lot of units, and you know, I can rhyme off 10 names of developers who are good at this and who can build at scale. And you know, it's much better to build a 350 unit building than a 35 unit building, because why? It's 10 times as many units, that's why. And so but all of us have a part to play in trying to be supportive of the whole concept, because again, I just come back to it. It's our problem because we have a very prosperous city. So why don't we try to fix it collectively?
Perfect. Okay, we're going to go Nancy, 30 seconds, and Stefan, 30 seconds if we can.
I'm unmute now. Okay, I should be.
Nope.
Just used up 5 seconds on that. Sorry. Yeah, I guess I just want to repeat some things that have already been said, but I think it's going to sound odd coming from a nonprofit, but I think it's really important to support the private sector. They're in business to do what they do, and they do it well, and they can give back if they're profitable, and they do give to charities. But I do think that it's, in terms of playing at it differently, however you want to put it, Stefan, like, new innovative ways. We've talked for so long. We've held all kinds of, conferences and sessions and webinars now on the topic. And unless we really learn how to all play together in the sandbox, we have to change. As Leif put it, we can't afford not to change. We want to talk about affordable housing. So.
Exactly right. Well, Stefan, last word to you, and then I'll do a very, very quick wrap.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I think too often we think about housing as a cost. And I think while the pandemic has been tragic, I think it's given us an opportunity here. It's put a bright spotlight on the need for affordable housing. It's hard to shelter in place when you don't have shelter. And I think we have to find a way to make investing in affordable housing for the private market more appealing. So what does that look like? Is it, corporate social responsibility? Is it things like ESG criteria, so environmental, social governance criteria, social impact investment funds? How do we draw the capital that has gone to the sidelines right now, but when it's going to come back at some point, and how do we position ourselves in such a way that it comes back to the right places and is directed towards affordable housing as inevitably the economy will recover? Housing is part of infrastructure, just like roads, bridges, etc. And we needed to think about it that way. And it is critical to the economic recovery of this country that we invest in and find ways to build more affordable housing.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone, both the panelists, everyone who's joined us today. for Shula, Creatio, Our House, CMHC, Kahila, for an excellent and really meaningful discussion. The webinar will be available after we do some editing, and you'll get that emailed around. So again, thank you everyone for joining us, and hopefully we'll see everyone soon.